Okay. So, so first tell us about your family, where you grew up, and your parents, were they deaf? And what was that like for you to grow up with deaf parents?
That's a question that I receive often. Yes, my parents are both deaf, and I did grow up in a deaf family. My two brothers were hearing. And I grew up in the deaf community really because we lived at the School for the Deaf in Rochester for the first 7 years of my life. So our house was on the campus. So I was really in a deaf community, and all of the people in that community fingerspelled only. There was no signing permitted of any sort at any time. And people do ask me, well, what was it like to have deaf parents? And I really don't know, because I never had hearing parents. So I don't have anything to compare it to. But I can think of certain artifacts from my life that other people didn't experience. If my parents said to be home at 5 o'clock in the evening, that was non-negotiable. It wasn't a subject of discussion. I simply had to be there at 5 o'clock because I couldn't call or tell somebody to tell my parents because my friends didn't sign. So if they said be home at 5 o'clock, you have to be home at 5 o'clock. And other artifacts, examples of having deaf parents that was a little bit of a different experience than other people was that we didn't have a phone either. So we didn't have a phone, so they needed phone calls made. So I would have to go next door, ask the person if I could use their phone, and place calls for my parents to different people that they might be doing business with. And when I'd go back home, my mother would have a follow-on question, like, oh, well, what about this? So then I had to go back and place a second call, which over time I learned to anticipate the follow-up questions myself, so that when I was over there at the neighbor's house, I could place, the call and get all of the required information. So my experience growing up at the School for the Deaf was really an experience I really cherish, because it was wonderful to see my father so admired, and my mother by extension from him, because he was very much loved in that school community because he was the only deaf teacher. There was a whole school for deaf kids from like first grade through high school, and they kept them past 18. I think they kept them almost up to 21. They were allowed to stay in the school. And he was very much admired, and everybody loved Mr. Patrie. They would always fingerspell his name, and they'd say, my name was Mr. Patrie's daughter. And because he was so revered, I felt very special and notable in the community. And I really had a wonderful, wonderful childhood. I was cherished not only by the deaf community, but also by my parents, so I don't have any regrets or, bitterness or anything about having deaf parents. I feel that it really is a big asset in my background.
So your parents wouldn't go with you over to make the phone call, just you would go over to the neighbor to make the phone call?
Correct. Right. They would just send me to make the phone call and then come back with the information and then go back with the additional information. And I was given a lot of responsibility very early in life. I think that's characteristic of people that have deaf parents. I was given a lot of decision making. I was given a lot of authority. I was given a lot of responsibility. And I never really abused any of those things. I just felt that I just somehow knew that that responsibility was very important and that it, shouldn't be violated or taken advantage of. I was given opportunities to make decisions for myself that weren't questioned and were supported. And I look back on that now and I think, wow, I was making adult-like decisions at a very, very young age. One example is that I decided to leave the Catholic school in the middle of 5th grade. It just no longer fit with me. Now, how I knew at the age of 10 that the whole Catholic system wasn't a fit, I don't know, but I told my parents I needed to go to the public school. And they said, oh, okay, so you would probably have to interpret that meeting anyway. They didn't use that word. but that was the idea. And so why don't we just give you a note and then you negotiate that? So I did. And the departure from the Catholic school was, along with some very stern admonitions from the Monsignor and so on. And then I walked across the field to the public school and gave that principal a note and said, my mother said I can come to your school. And he said, are you enrolled in school? I said, no. So that's just one example of the decisions that I was allowed to make and that they weren't questioned.
From your parents?
Yes.
And the other people that you would call and talk to, they didn't question you either, even though you were a child?
No.
So was there something about you that was so mature that they just said whatever you, or how did that work? Because you were young.
That's a good question. I was very young when I was doing some interpreting for my parents. I remember one event when I was probably six or so. My father had to go to the fire station to renew his driver's license. And they told me to tell him that deaf and dumb people can't drive. And I knew that, first of all, I wasn't going to convey that information. And so I filtered it out. Even at a very young age, I knew how to filter out some of the particulars of the conversation in order to let the communication go forward. And my father explained to the guy that he drove over and that he did have a license. He just wanted to renew the license. So I remember brokering those kinds of misunderstandings between hearing and deaf people before age 7, and probably maybe even earlier than that.
Were you the oldest?
No, I was the youngest.
So why do you think they chose you and not your brothers?
Well, my brothers are 5 and 10 years older than I am.
Oh,
So by the time I was 7, my oldest brother had already left to go to college, to the Air Force Academy, so he was gone. And then my other brother, the middle brother, he was often out, doing things that somebody his age would do, so I think it just fell naturally to me. And surely all 3 of us had those responsibilities,
So you all 3 did, but one was gone and your brother...
Yeah.
No, you just said something very interesting. You said he was out doing things that people of his age would do. So what does that mean about you and your age, that you weren't about doing things that you would do at that age, or?
Well, I was so much younger that I had less, freedoms. So the difference between a 5-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy, he can go out and ride his bike around the neighborhood, but the 5-year-old girl would stay home.
Okay.
And then correspondingly, the 5-year difference, he was, doing out-of-the-house things more than I was. And, I really can't speak for him. I don't know what his sense of obligation was, but I think we all felt a sense of, a need to be there to interpret if information needed to be shared back and forth.
Right. It's very interesting. So then you grew up on the Rochester School for the Deaf, and then you left the Catholic school and went to the public school. And then you graduated from the public school, and then where did you go?
I graduated from the high school in our area. By this time we moved to the suburbs, and I graduated from the high school there. And I was very studious, so I took 3 advanced placement courses, and that waived me out of at least 3 courses at the college level. So I entered college with a whole semester's worth of credits. And I went to a school near my home, about an hour away, because I still felt that sense of obligation. I didn't want to be too far from my parents because I knew I was the last one. So I was very happy to go to school fairly close to home. And my idea was that I would become a language therapist to work with deaf children. I was very interested in teaching deaf children how to improve their language skills through using sign language. So I enrolled in audiology and speech pathology, And I was interested in the science of it and the science of audiology and measuring, and I really liked the science of it. And I liked the school. It was a really good school. But then I ran into a conflict with my department chair because since it really was a speech pathology program, they were very sure that I should be trying to help deaf people speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very sure that I wasn't. So I went through the program. I got very high marks. We still had this essential disagreement. And in spite of that, they gave me a complete scholarship plus a stipend to go on to graduate school in the same major at the same school. So I was very fortunate because I was able to get a bachelor's and a master's in that same field, in audiology and speech pathology. But before I finished my bachelor's degree, my parents came over to the college and they said, "Oh, this new thing is opening in Rochester, this week, and they said they need interpreters, so why don't you go there?" Because they knew I had this ongoing conflict with the department chair and that I was unhappy about that. So I called NTID, which was the institution they were referring to. I called NTID and said, "Hi, I have deaf parents." And that was about all I said. And they said, "Come to work tomorrow." So awesome. Great. So we packed up everything, right? And I withdrew from the semester. The semester had just started. So I withdrew from everything and went to NTID. And within a week, I mean, really just in a very, very short period of time, I showed up for my first day of work. And I sat down and fingerspelled everything. And I can remember that first day of work very clearly. It was an opening assembly for all of NTID and probably all of RIT as well. And it was a speaker named Bill Sands who wrote a book called My Shadow Ran Fast. It was a very powerful speech, and I really never tried to interpret, monologic talk, single speaker going on and on. So it was quite a challenge, but I just kept fingerspelling. And the deaf students who were there in front of me, the first class at NTID, they all had this horrified look on their face like, "Is this what college is going to be? We have to read fingerspelling all the time?" So through working with each other, the students and I and the other interpreters who were there, we all really learned on the job how to be an interpreter, how to use an interpreter. And at that time, the code of ethics didn't govern our behavior. There weren't any standards of practice about how long someone should work. So we worked 40 hours a week, and I think I got paid $5 an hour or something, and I thought it was just so wonderful. Yeah, I think it was relatively, low pay, but I was thrilled to have it. And because there weren't any real standards of practice, I actually took the courses that I was interpreting for and got college credit. I got a whole semester's worth of credit by just doing the homework for the courses that I was interpreting for.
So you did do the homework?
I did the homework, yes. I was always a very good student. I always liked to do my homework, liked to study. So it was a really good experience because I learned so much from the other interpreters that I worked with. One of whom you may know, Sharon Newman Solo. She was one of the first interpreters there, and she had a little more experience than I did. So we just learned on the job, really, how to be full-time interpreters in a post-secondary setting.
Was there just 3 of you?
Yeah, there were 3 full-time people. A woman named Mary Lou was the other one, and then Alice Beardsley was another interpreter. She was part-time, as I recall. And then some of the other staff members did some interpreting too.
So which school was it that you left to go to NTID?
Oh, I was at Geneseo, it's part of the State University system of New York.
Uh-huh. And how do you spell Geneseo?
Geneseo.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what city was that in?
Geneseo.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So how come your dad had heard about this job? Where did he hear about it from? Did he have friends at NTID or?
Well, it was quite the buzz in Rochester at that time, that there was a new institution coming for deaf people. So I think, anybody in the deaf community would, knew about it.
Right. So do you remember the year that that occurred?
That was 1968.
Mm-hmm. And so you interpreted for how long? And then did you start training interpreters, or how did that all come about?
Yes. I interpreted for 2 full semesters, and at the end of the second semester, which would have been May or June, they said, okay, good job. Now you can teach interpreting. And they had, I think, maybe 7 or 8 RIT students who could sign a little bit, mm-hmm. and who were interested in becoming interpreters. And I think those particular people lived in the dorms with the deaf students. So they may have had some signing ability already. And so they gave us a summer to teach them how to interpret. And we thought that was great. But as I look back on it now, it was really more of a vocabulary class. Mm-hmm. Because I had no idea how to teach interpreting. We didn't talk about processing or keeping up with the message or working with idea units. None of that was really apparent to those of us who had been interpreting for long periods of time, because none of these people had deaf parents. So they were all new to the process and the profession. So from that day until now, I have still been very, intrigued by the notion of how to teach interpreting to people that didn't have deaf parents. I mean, that was really the start of my great interest in teaching interpreting.
Was it NTID?
Mm-hmm. That first year when I was just completely without resources, without ideas, but I could see that it was something that needed to be done. Mm-hmm. And I sensed that I had the resource, the wherewithal. I had the intuition that I could teach interpreting. Mm-hmm. I just didn't know how.
Right. Who was your, I want to follow up with that question, but who was your boss at NTID? Who was the person that hired you to work there?
I was hired by Bob Frasino. Uh-huh. He was the director. I'm not sure what the title was exactly, uh-huh. but he was the director at the time. And my immediate boss was Jim Stangarone. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So you said that was where you felt you you knew that you could teach. So you started teaching at NTID and started thinking about the process of, or you didn't even, did you start thinking about the process of interpreting and how to teach that, or how did that all come about?
Well, we had 6 weeks, I think, to accomplish this task. Uh-huh. And I knew that we were working just at the vocabulary level and that wasn't really it. But I didn't know what to do. So I didn't even have the word process in my mind. I just knew that vocabulary wasn't going to serve them well. They wouldn't really be able to do the jobs, mm-hmm. So that's when I first became really intrigued with the idea of teaching interpreting. But I didn't really start teaching then, because I moved to Washington, D.C. With the person I was married to at that time, mm-hmm. who had a job at MSSD, the Model Secondary School mm-hmm. for the Deaf. And I completed my master's at Catholic University, and then I never worked as an audiologist or a speech pathologist because there was such a demand for interpreters in the Washington, D.C. area that it wasn't an intentional decision to become an interpreter or to not become an audiologist or anything. That it wasn't really an intentional decision. It was just, I was just doing the next thing, mm-hmm. the next thing that seemed to need doing, and there was so much need for interpreting. And I'm so glad I took that path, because I got to work with a lot of wonderful people here in Washington. I got to work with Boyce Williams and Edna Adler and so many of those people that have been so influential in our field. And I remember how grateful they were that I would interpret for them. And they would say, Boyce Williams said, "Wow, can you fingerspell?" And I could understand his fingerspelling, which he really appreciated. And so there were a lot of people, Murph Garrettson, and just so many people that were real leaders. And I didn't know that. They were just people that I knew, and I was happy to interpret for them. It took me through many wonderful experiences on all levels of federal government, state government, local government, post-secondary situations, medical. I did a lot of medical interpreting in hospitals. I was allowed to set up a program there at a local hospital for the employees to help them become aware of the implications of having a deaf patient. It led to setting up a sign language program at a community college where I was able to hire some deaf people to teach in those classes. And it just led to so many wonderful opportunities that just one thing led to another, and I never regretted the path not taken. I never regretted that because the one that I was on was always so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of legal interpreting. I used what we called a relay interpreter at that time, which was unheard of, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just wasn't done. But I did use that kind of support, partnership in courtrooms, and I was even able to interpret at the Supreme Court a few times. I mean, just being positioned in Washington in the early 70s, it just led to so many opportunities that I just was so grateful for.
Wow. How was it interpreting at the Supreme Court?
It was very hard to hear. It was really difficult because it's a great, huge marble chamber, and the justices sit back, behind,
Mm-hmm.
and the interpreter and the audience is well away from the justices. And as far as I recall, they weren't really using amplification or
Mm-hmm.
anything, and I just couldn't hear them very well. I just could not hear them. And as what happened, my former husband was sitting in the front row, and he was signing to me so I could repeat the information. So because he was facing the other way, he could hear and see
Mm-hmm.
better, so he was able to relay the information to me. So we used relay interpreting and didn't even really realize it.
Wow. So a lot of people have asked or wondered about Boyce Williams, how he was able to get as much funding, because he got a lot of funding for many, as you know, many things, National Theater for the Deaf, RID, government funding for many things. What was his personality like? Why was he able, was there something about him, because you worked with him, was there something about him that made him, why did people just listen to him?
He had a great presence. He brought a great presence. He brought a great deal of conviction. He was very well spoken. He was very well respected. Why was he respected? I think because he didn't, I was very young,
Mm-hmm.
so from my perspective, he didn't play games.
Mm-hmm.
He was very passionate about what he could see was needed. He was a visionary. He was really, truly a visionary, and he was highly placed in the government. And he was the only one who was deaf at that level. And I think because of those things, because he was, he had a college degree, he was well placed in the government, he had absolute conviction about what needed to happen, he was well respected by his peers, and he was just so passionate about getting these things. And he seemed to be a person that could spin a lot of wheels at once,
Mm-hmm.
and he did. He just seemed to be like at the head of this meeting and this meeting and this meeting. He just seemed to be like running a lot of movements at once, and he seemed to be doing it very effectively because people really, they sat up and listened.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was maybe in general society was a little more respectful. people in positions than they are now. I mean, I'm sure that they had disagreements, in the government and so on, but people really, he had brought a force with him that was not domineering and not like control seeking, but he just brought such a presence and such a conviction to the table that people believed him. And I think that they believed that he was really the voice of deaf people and the deaf community.
So what you just said about him is what a lot of people say about you.
Oh.
That you are a visionary for interpreter education. And do you know people say that?
No.
So do you see yourself as a visionary for interpreter educators?
I didn't really see myself that way. No. I'm trying it on. I can see why somebody might say that, because I have always had a vision of this must be doable. There must be a way to organize information and materials for people to be able to teach interpreting. There must be a way to do this. And so I have always had that in my mind from 1968 or 69, that there must be a way to teach this. And because I had so much experience watching my father teach, as a little girl I sat in his classroom and I watched him teach, and I just developed a love of teaching that feels almost genetic to me. And I thought, well, if he can get information, at a subliminal level, if he can get information like this to deaf students through fingerspelling, surely I can teach too, and I didn't really ever set out to be a teacher. I did not set out to be an interpreter. And I just feel really fortunate that my life channeled me or gave me those opportunities to do both, to be an interpreter with so many wonderful opportunities, so many wonderful deaf people, and then to become a teacher. I didn't set out to do those things, and so I consider it a real gift.
Do you think interpreter educators today feel the same passion that you felt? Or still feel?
I don't know. My sense is, if I were to take the pulse of the field as a whole, I feel like a lot of interpreter educators are still puzzled about how to do this and how to get students from point A to working as interpreters. I feel like they still need a lot of support. In general, it's a huge generalization, but I think that many interpreter educators might feel like they can do this one slice, like they can teach this particular thing, but I'd like to see more interpreter educators sort of cross-train so that they could teach anywhere in the curriculum, and that would help them as educators feel more assured of teaching the process.
Right. So you've written all of these books, the education or interpreting series, EIS, right? How did that come about? Because you're talking about the process and all those things that it takes to teach. How did that vision come about?
That really was a vision. It really was. I was teaching at Gallaudet at that time, and I was visiting my parents in San Diego, and I had just been sort of like really enjoying making materials to teach interpreting with, because when I started teaching interpreting at Gallaudet, there wasn't anything really to work with. There were a lot of videos in the library there, and there was like a textbook that we had, but it wasn't really a textbook about how to do interpreting. So every day that I went into class, I sort of had to make up stuff, like, where are we going? What are we trying to do here? What video would help me make this point? What kind of a lecture would help make this point? how will I know if the students achieved this skill? So even in the early 80s, I could see that there was a lot to the system of teaching interpreting that just didn't exist. So I struggled with that, and I tried to, for my own records, keep track of, well, this video is good for this and this is good for that. And then on this one evening in San Diego, I was sitting on my parents' couch, and I just had this, like a blinding flash of, well, I could organize a series of books with videos that I prescribe or created to go with each type of book, with each lesson, with each specific activity. I could do that. I could just put those together, and then interpreter educators wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every semester, and then students would also have homework that they could do. The way that I was teaching, I had the video in the classroom, but the students couldn't take that. They couldn't take that home and study it. So classroom time was always spent looking at videos, and I couldn't really come up with authentic homework that would be helpful. So the idea just came to me just in a flash, and I kind of wrote it up on some paper and took it to Dawn Sign Press, which was also in San Diego, and I left it for Joe Danis, who wasn't in that day, and some time went by. I felt comfortable taking it to him because when I was running the community college sign language program, Joe and a few other people were looking for jobs after graduation. So I hired them as sign language teachers. And then years later, he was running a small t-shirt publishing company. So I took this idea to him, and it sat on his desk because he didn't know that I had changed my name back to my maiden name. So I followed up a little bit later, and he said, "Oh, that's you? Sure, I'll do that." And he never really even looked into it in any depth. He says, "Oh, if it's you and you want to do this for interpreters, okay." So Dawn Sign Press has been enormously generous and supportive of me since that time, and that was 1995. And they spent 5 years with me developing all the videos, well, some of the videos, but we spent 5 years capturing materials on video that would later become the basis for the book. So it took 5 years to gather all the video, and then I published the first book in 2000. So I was working at the rate of about one book a year, but then I've slowed down a little bit recently. So my 9th book is in the publisher's hands now, and I'm working on my 10th book, which is the final one in the series. And the idea was to create materials in both ASL and English that could be used for the different stages of interpreter education. And there's a teacher's version, student version, so that the teacher will feel prepared, because I even have questions for them to use, and then the students will have homework with guidance.
That series is a gift.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed doing it, and I'm just so grateful for Dawn Sign Press for supporting me all this time to get this work done.
So you taught at Gallaudet, and was that the community college? What community college did you?
The community college was Prince George's community college, and I taught there, and I got other people to teach there. I was running the sign language program there.
Where was that?
In Largo, Maryland, in Prince George's County. And then in 1984, I was offered a position at Gallaudet. Well, actually, just to back up a little bit, in the 70s, I was teaching for Gallaudet in the evenings. I had small children, so I was teaching in the evenings. In their short program, they had a 10-week program, and then later they had a certificate, I think, and then later they had an associate's program. So I taught for them in the evenings from maybe 75, I can't remember when I started, but it was pretty early, mid-70s, and then up until 84, then I was offered a full-time position in their Associate of Arts program. And I started teaching there, and I had that sensation like, there's got to be a way to systematize this instead of spending so much time preparing new materials each week. So after about, let's see, that was 84. By 87, my department chair and I realized that the Associate of Arts program, he said, he was new to interpreting. He said, well, how's this working? And I said, it's really not working. And he said, well, should we propose a bachelor's? I said, oh yeah, that would be a dream come true. No one had thought of that at that point. So we put together a proposal for a bachelor's degree in interpreting at Gallaudet, and it required a number of ASL courses at the lower level, and the faculty senate refused to even consider the proposal because ASL could not be considered a foreign language at the time. We were astonished by that, and so we said, well, okay, let's do a master's degree. It was just that quick, like whatever, just do a master's degree that didn't have a language requirement. And so we put that together very quickly, and then within a year, that proposal was approved, although it was quite a fight. Really had to fight for it at the level of the faculty senate. They're like, why would you need a master's in that? Nobody really understood. This would have been about 1988, and they were thinking, wow, you're pretty big for your britches, thinking you need a master's degree to do that. I mean, everybody does that around here. And the biggest fight actually was at the Board of Trustees, which was the next phase. I can distinctly remember just sweating right through my suit the way I had to really fight for it and provide the rationale for why someone would want to offer a master's degree in interpreting. And it was approved, and we were able to solicit and enroll students very quickly. And it just felt so right. It just felt right. I mean, nobody had done it before, but it was like, this feels really right. I have students now who have a bachelor's degree, who can already sign fluently, who already had good English skills. We screened very carefully for all of that, so that when they came in the program, we could really work on interpreting. And we felt very good about it. It was just, we were able to graduate people who were employment ready using that approach.
Wow. What do you think the biggest, if you can remember, because I know it was a while ago, but what was the Board of Trustees' biggest problem with having the master's degree program, and do you remember how you convinced them that it was the right thing to do?
Their complaint or their concern was, this thing, interpreting, it hardly even needs an associate's degree. I mean, can't people just do that? Why would it need any training at all, let alone at the graduate level? So the case that I was making for it was, the more interpreters know about things, the better they can convey information back and forth. The more world knowledge they have, the more sophisticated they will be. If they already have a bachelor's degree and they already have language fluency, they will be able to work more effectively. They won't have to stop and ask the deaf person, what was that? What did you say? They will represent deaf people more carefully and clearly. I really took the approach of having it be a really good thing for deaf people. I didn't emphasize the need for higher levels of academic credentials because a lot of the people on the board were deaf. So I put it in terms of, this will make life better for you and other deaf people if interpreters are more highly educated and more qualified.
Right.
It was a hard sell.
And how long did it take them to decide that that was okay?
Well, it had already gone through the curriculum committee and the faculty senate, so the bigger battles were already over. Usually at that level, the Board of Trustees is really just a rubber stamp. I mean, if it gets to their table, it should be approved. So I thought it was just a formality, but it was really quite a challenge. And they decided within a couple of days, or maybe even that day. But I found out about it within a few days. So that was May, and then we enrolled students the following September, so we had a very busy summer.
Wow. So you were, you established the master's program at Gallaudet. And then how long did you teach there?
I taught there for almost 18 years. The first year of the master's program, we were still running the Associate of Arts degree program because we had to graduate those people.
Right.
So for 1 year, we were running 2 programs. And I was also running the interpreter education grant from the federal government. Rehabilitation Services Administration funded some regional interpreter training grants, and so through that process I also had continued interaction with Boyce Williams, and so that was, another part of my great good fortune.
Well, we went to Gallaudet bookstore yesterday and looked at some of the materials, and I think it's very interesting. As we walked in, every one of your books, did you know that?
No.
Every one of your books is on their shelf.
Oh.
Including your RSVP.
Oh, good.
Including your legal, the green, the legal interpreting book you made, and the other, what was the other one?
Insurance?
Yes. Every one of them laid out in the bookstore. I thought that was pretty cool.
Oh, thank you for telling me. No, I had no idea. I haven't been there in a while.
So think about all that, and then it's right there.
Oh, that's great. That feels really good because by the time I was writing those, I was no longer working at Gallaudet.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, they're all there. Can you stop for a sec? Who do you think has influenced your teaching or your research, or just who has influenced you?
I think my way into finding influence was probably through the American Translators Association. As a new teacher back in the 80s, there wasn't really anyone to look to. There wasn't anyone that could mentor me. There wasn't really any guidance available. It was just go for it yourself and figure it out. So I began looking in the ATA proceedings and then going to ATA meetings, and there I met other people who were teaching interpreting because they have a division for interpreters within the American Translators Association. So I was very fortunate to be able to go to some of those early conferences because I met people like Sylvie Lambert and Rhoda Roberts, and some other people that are very influential, Barbara Moser-Mercer, other researchers in the field of spoken language. And then it just like a light bulb went off in my head, like, oh, it's the same process. Interpreting in 2 languages or interpreting in 2 languages that both happen to be spoken or spoken and signed. And I feel like maybe I was one of the first people, or maybe one of the early adopters of the notion that there were more similarities than differences. And even people in spoken language were not completely convinced that it was the same thing, because when I would go to ATA conferences, there wouldn't be a button that you could put on your name badge for ASL. So it had to be the button that represented languages of limited diffusion, which is actually not true. But so then people would say, oh, what's your language of limited diffusion? And I'd say American Sign Language, and they'd go, oh, that's not really a language, but okay. So going to those conferences put me in touch with people from spoken language interpreting, and then I started to see that people like Georgianne Weller from Mexico and people from all over the world were already doing research on interpreting, and that really captured my interest. Those people really influenced me because they were a little ahead in documenting their ideas and doing research, and I was able to go and visit Barbara Moser-Mercer in Geneva. She runs a translation and interpreting school there, think it's an interpreting school, and sit down and talk with her about her ideas. And I was able to, when I was involved with CIT, I was able to invite Rhoda Roberts and Sylvie Lambert to come to CIT and to start that cross-pollination that I think is almost taken for granted now, but it wasn't then. And so I think the people in spoken language interpreting have influenced me the most, and in particular I would say Daniel Gilles. I read a lot of different theories, and his seemed to be the most relatable because he boiled down some very complex things into understandable models, understandable language, and I just felt like his work had so much applicability, and that's what I based my textbooks on, was his theoretical research. So I would say that those people in spoken language interpreting that I've mentioned, and others that I haven't mentioned, would be the ones that have influenced me most directly.
How did you find out about ATA?
Well, when I was a new teacher, I was just searching. I would just search around. I went to the library at Gallaudet and I asked, do you have any information on teaching interpreting? And they're like, why would you teach that, first of all? I thought everybody knew that. So I just kept searching and searching. There wasn't the internet then, so it was just, manual searching through different libraries, different periodicals. And I hit on the ATA, which was a big plus for me.
So you found ATA, and then you have been involved with RID and CIT.
Mm-hmm.
How did you become involved with both of those organizations?
In 1970, when I married my first husband, on our honeymoon, we went to the Delavan, Wisconsin RID conference. We had both joined RID by that time. It just seemed like a good idea. He was an interpreter, I was an interpreter, so we both had joined by 1970. Or maybe we joined at that conference. So on our honeymoon, we went to the RID conference. And it was a very small gathering at the School for the Deaf there. Ken, I can't remember his name, the man who was the superintendent there. So it was part of our life very early on. We both became certified within 2 years of that. I was certified in 1973, or maybe the end of 72, and he was certified at the same time. So we began offering the certification exam because we were both involved in the Potomac chapter of the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, which we also helped establish in Maryland. It served Maryland, Virginia, and DC. So we ran the certification exams. We used to bring the 16 millimeter projector into our house, all the films, and then take them to the testing site. So it just seemed, it was just like so much of my career, it was just the next thing that needed doing. We never really questioned it, we just, we've got to get other people certified. So we just made that available. So I kind of fell into RID, and then as I was a new teacher, maybe 10 years later or so, I was a new teacher just casting about for help, does anybody know how to do this? And I can't remember how I heard about CIT, but I signed up as soon as I could because I thought maybe there were other people in the field of sign language interpreter education who knew more or who could help me or who I could just talk to.
And then when did you become a member of CIT? Do you remember?
I would say it was in the 80s.
Uh-huh. So right after it began?
It would have been maybe 87,
Uh-huh.
88, 89, around in there. I don't remember exactly.
And then you became the president.
Mm-hmm.
Were you on the board before you were president?
I wasn't on the board. I was program chair for a convention, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed putting together a program. I can't remember which one it was. Was it the one at Sugarloaf in Michigan? I can't remember which one it was, but I really enjoyed the program chair position because that's when I was able to bring people from spoken language interpreting into our organization.
Was that the first time that had ever been done?
As far as I know.
Uh-huh.
I would have to check the records, but I was really thrilled to do that.
Who did you bring? Do you remember? You had mentioned that before.
Yes, Rhoda Roberts and Sylvie Lambert.
And what did people? Do you remember what people thought about that at CIT?
I remember that. I remember that they were a little bit like awestruck because these two people had already started breaking down the task into little pieces, the steps you have to teach and the cognitive processing and certain exercises you could do. And they brought a lot of authority to it. And I think the people in CIT were a little bit awestruck maybe, and maybe not quite ready for that systematic approach, which is ironic because at about the same time they were doing task analysis. And I thought they fit together perfectly, but I didn't really sense that there was like a wholehearted embrace, because I think maybe even the sign language interpreters thought that spoken language interpreting was something else. So it took a while for both groups to understand that there's really a lot in common.
And then you became president of CIT. Do you remember when?
I think that was 1990.
And what was that like? Was it, you worked with a lot of people. What was the direction that the organization was going in that time? Do you remember?
Yes, it was going in the red. It certainly wasn't a position that I sought out. Just like everything else in my career, I didn't seek out. I really have not sought out anything. Really, I didn't seek out the presidency of the organization. But somehow my name got on the ballot, and then I won by acclamation because there was nobody else running. So at first I was like a little bit terrified and like, oh, what have I gotten myself into? But once I started, I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I was dismayed to find out that the finances were so shaky and that there was a lot of debt, a lot of things that had to be cleared up. I had a great board to work with, and in that 2-year period we really got things turned around, so that by the end of the time we were in the black, we had balanced books, things were really on the upswing. We just had such a great group of people that were all really interested in working for CIT, and it was a great experience.
And since then, you have won the Mary Stotler Award. And I think, was that 90? Remember the year that you received the award? Can't remember the year.
Yes, that would have been 99, I think. 99, yeah. It was a big surprise, first of all.
Was it?
Yeah. I certainly didn't know I was nominated. It wasn't anything I sought, you know. Right. But it was really quite an honor. I was really very surprised to receive that.
What do you feel about teaching? Because a lot of people have made comments about you. And in trainings and things that I've been involved in, that they feel that you are a exemplary teacher and that you're kind, and that it doesn't matter what question they ask, that you they don't feel stupid asking a question. So could you tell me or how you feel about teaching, and why do I wonder what I'm not that you would know, but I wonder why people feel that kindness and love from you. Do you feel that as you teach, or what do you feel about teaching?
I love teaching. I love teaching, and it doesn't even matter what. I love teaching interpreting because I really feel like I've done my homework there. I feel like I really keep up with the research. You know, I buy, current literature, I subscribe to journals, I read them. So I really feel like I've done my homework in interpreting, and I don't feel like necessarily other people that I would teach would have had the time or the interest or the opportunity to read those things. So I feel that I have an obligation to pass on what I have found. When I had that position at Gallaudet for all those years, I felt like all I had to do was sit there and information would come to me from all sources. And I just felt just like an instinctive need to just pass that on. Oh, this information, oh, that person would like this. So I just felt like things came to me and I had the opportunity to see that they got out to other people. And I feel that way about teaching too. I feel like I've done my homework. I feel like I have had time to study things that other people might want to know, but they haven't had time to study those things. So I'm very eager to pass that on, and I almost feel like it's easy for me to sort of digest it and then give it out in digestible bits. If, in case people aren't interested in reading statistics or theoretical material, I feel like I can put it into language that whoever I'm working with could understand. I feel like I can get to them where they are. I just love doing it, I think, because I got to watch my father teach early on. I think that gave me a lot of insight. I just love helping people understand things, and it doesn't matter whether it's interpreting or something else. I love being able to pass information on, and if you don't get it to a place where they can understand it, then you're not passing on information. And I think other things that I do that help me be mindful of a student's position is that I am put myself as a student in other disciplines. So I put myself as a student in the field of glass, studying warm glass, kiln-formed glass, and in yoga and in other areas. So in those areas, I'm not an expert. I'm the student. And I understand how it feels when you don't understand. And someone could have explained, well, in this project that we're going to do today, you will do this, and I'm showing you how, and you'll do this, and I'm showing you, and I'm showing you. And then when I go to do it, I'm like, oh, what did he say? So I really enjoy putting myself in that position so that I can understand how a student feels when you're explaining something complex and then it requires them to do it. So I can really relate to students or relate to people that are learning something new, because it's, you don't know what you don't know. So, and if people feel comfortable enough to ask questions, I feel like that promotes their learning. And, I just remember how embarrassing it is for me to, like, oh, you just said that, and I don't know, so I'm happy to hear that people think that about me. I didn't really know that, so I'm happy that people feel comfortable. Because if you don't feel comfortable, you can't really learn. If you're worried, that anxiety gets in the way of learning.
How do you think you came about? I know that you said that you remain yourself as a student. So, but many people are students and they still don't have that kindness or remember that they are students. So is there something that is deep within you, do you think, that just makes you want to help people succeed or help them do their dissertations? Or because you're involved in a lot of things that I don't think a lot of people know about. And you're a very humble and quiet leader. So what is that? Is it inside of you that...
What a good question. I don't think I've ever thought about that. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that there was nobody to help me. And I'm not bitter about that, and I don't mind that, but I don't think everybody else has to go through all of that discovery. If there's somebody, a little ahead of them on the path that could make the way smoother for them. And in terms of helping people who are now working on dissertations, I love doing that because they're the next leaders of the field. We want to get them into position. We want to get them through those academic hurdles so that they can really get going on their careers and, just take the reins, because the field is more and more in need of people who are authoritatively in command of their subject area. This teaching from your gut only goes so far. And I think it's time, and it is time, it is happening now, that more and more people are becoming sophisticated and really having a good grasp of the theory and the practice. And I just really support them, and just want all the newer leaders to have the way made smooth for them, so that they can go on and explore these specific areas that they want to bring light to.
Yeah. Do you think that there's something missing? Because everything seems to be going more towards academia.
Yeah.
And degrees are very important, we know that. And PhDs are becoming vital, must have for university teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something missing? Because you talk a lot about the deaf community and your love for deaf people and your parents. Do you feel that that is missing within the interpreter educators today, or do you feel that that's, what do you think about that?
I don't, I can't speak for everyone. I don't know for sure, but the shift toward greater and greater academic credentials is really mind-boggling and a big shift. It's a big shift, just even within the last 5 years, 10 years. I mean, when I got my doctorate, I was, one of very few people that had a doctorate, and the same is true of you. You were, there weren't many other people, but now there are a lot more people actively seeking those higher credentials, a greater percentage of the relatively small population of interpreter educators are seeking higher academic credentials. And I do think maybe that comes at a cost, because while you're studying for a doctorate, time is short. Your time is precious. You don't really necessarily have the time for the involvement. So maybe that happens during the person's time of studying. Hopefully that when they actually move into interpreter education, they get back more connections with the deaf community. I think we're right in the middle of that shift happening more toward academics, and it might be a little too soon to tell whether that means less involvement with the deaf community. It may just be, part of the wave that's coming through now. They have to focus on their studies, and I think those who were anchored in the deaf community to start with will remain so. But I don't think we know yet.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about all the things that you're involved in. You said as a student, glass making and yoga. So are those ways that you have kept balance in your life, or do you feel that at this time in your life you have balance? Have you always felt that way, that there's been a balance? Or have you kept balance as a person, an educator in our field? Because a lot of people don't. So how have you?
It requires constant awareness to add in those things that feed me, because a lot of my work drains me in a way. I'm basically an introvert, so my work requires that I be out in public dealing with lots of people, which I love and which I can do, but in contrast I need time to refill my own batteries, my own gas tank, and those other things that I enjoy doing bring me that. And working with glass and taking yoga, and the other big area would be gardening. And now I have a lot of property to deal with, and I feel a lot of it, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And so I ask people, or I do research. Oh, this kind of plant won't grow here. So I think being able to go into places where I don't know stuff really helps me be balanced, because that just shows, my interpreting world or my teaching world, I pretty much have the knowledge, I kind of have that, or I know how to get more of it. And this other area, there's a lot of questions for me, and that's what helps fill me up. I mean, I love these other things that I do, I love that, but the not knowing and being able to say, I don't know how to do this. How do you do this? That really feeds me. And I like, for me, that they're separate, because people in my glass world don't know anything about my professional world, and vice versa. So I like that separation. That just works for me. I guess I can give you an example of that. Yesterday I had to get air in my tires. My tires were low and the little light was on in the car. So I pulled into the gas station and I said to the woman who was working at the counter, I said, I should probably know how to do this, but it's a relatively new car and I don't know how to work your air pump. So she, oh, that's okay. And so she asked this other person to do that for me. I said, I feel really embarrassed. I feel like I should know how to put air in my tires. She said, oh no, no. You don't need to know how to do everything. You just need to know how to find the answers. So I said, well, you made me feel a lot better. And my tires are full.
And your light went off?
The light went off.
Oh, good.
Yes, yeah. So did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think balance is elusive. It's not something that stays in place.
Yeah.
I have to really work at it, and I have a relatively new marriage. I've only been married for about 4 years, and so that helps me, because whereas before I would have worked long into the evening, now I make myself stop, and spend time with my husband. So I think those changes help me stay more diversified.
Mm-hmm.
And interested in doing other things.
Right. And your family, you have kids. You have, how many kids do you have?
I have 2,
Uh-huh.
a daughter and a son.
And they seem to bring you great joy.
Oh yes. My daughter Renee lives in Charlotte with her family. She's got 2 boys, awesome grandchildren. And my son Kurt lives in Hollywood with his new wife Elisa, and they have an awesome dog whom I just met in person for the first time over Thanksgiving. So yeah, they're really nice people. My kids are just such nice people. I really enjoy their company.
Do you think that side that helps you to have balance too, is your kids and your grandkids?
Yes, it does. I think anytime I think about people other than myself, it helps me with balance. I do some community service work, and anytime I just think about other people, I think that just innately helps me balance out. Just to put things at their real size. Sometimes something I might be working on professionally might get a little out of proportion, but really, when I look in these other directions, it just helps things take their real size.
Right. I noticed that you read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So is that another area that helps? Does it help you professionally? You read a lot of, not just interpreting books, but a lot of other books. Mm-hmm. What does that do for you and your soul and the creativity that you give so freely to everyone?
I just love to read. I've always loved to read. My parents took us to the library, the public library, every week. Get a stack of books, as many as I could carry, I could have. So I've just always loved to read. It gives me a sense of relaxation. And I'm interested to see how other people write. Right now I'm writing all technical things, but I think I'd like to write some fiction, or maybe take the story that my dad wrote. My dad wrote his autobiography, and now he's not here to ask any more questions of, but I feel like that story could be fleshed out a lot more, so I'd like to take that and maybe make it into historical fiction. But I love to see how other people write, and I love reading about areas that I don't know about, so that I can be more aware. Like I just recently read Monuments Men, about the art that was stolen by the Nazis during the war, and how some other people reclaimed that art. I didn't know anything about that, and there's just so many things that I don't know about, that if I just spend a little bit of time reading each day, I can know about things.
Do you think that you would ever want to write your own personal history?
That hasn't occurred to me. I'll have to consider that. I don't know the answer.
Because your dad did a great, as you said, personal
Yes, he
history.
did. Yeah.
And it would, maybe that would be a great, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a great thing for people to know you.
I'm going to put that on the list.
Good. So let's set the record straight.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people will say Carol Patrie, some people say Carol Patrie. Which is it?
Patrie, because it's French. It's a
Okay.
French name, and that would be the French pronunciation, although probably some people in the family pronounce it different ways.
But it's Patrie.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad. Okay, so I think I have one final question that I really am interested in knowing as I've watched other people interview on TV and other great people, and I consider you to be a great and insightful person, is do you feel like, where do you want to see our field, this profession, where do you want to see it go? And the other is, and we can take them in turn, the other is, what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? Or do you feel like you've left?
Where would I like to see the field go?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start with that one. I think it's time we got our act together. We have enough history now, we have enough data, we have almost enough people. We have a core group of people, and I think we should get our act together about what is interpreter education, and if we take people into four-year programs, which is the way the field is going, if we take students into four-year programs, they should be employment ready when they finish. They should be able to get entry-level jobs and get certified within, let's say, a year. Let's be generous and say a year. But I feel like so far we're doing a disservice by taking people into programs, whether they're 2-year or 4-year, but I'm speaking primarily about 4-year programs. I think that when they graduate, those students should be able to get work as interpreters if they spent 4 years paying tuition and doing the work. We should provide them with a pathway that gets them to employment, because it's a practice profession. So I feel that the way to do that is to have the highest bar at the beginning of the program, and I think that there should be something like assessment centers, which is a practice that's used in other disciplines, where there are centralized locations where people are tested for their aptitude, academic background, and whatever other criteria you wish to test for before they enter any specific program, so that we would know if we're taking people in who are, say, 18 or so, does this person have decision-making abilities? Do they have a value system? Do they have a moral system? Can they make decisions about moral dilemmas? And then do they have language facility in their first language? I'm not even testing about their ASL skills, but do they have language facility in their first language? And do they have the ability to do these cognitive processes within one language? So if we could test for some of those things or assess for some of those things before they enter a program, I think the programs would have better outcomes. I think that people would have a better chance of being employment ready if the first bar were very high to get into an interpreter education program, or high enough that we think if you can pass this bar, then that in itself predicts success for you in the field. That's all we could ever do, is really predict success for someone or not predict success. And I think you can see for yourself, there are new students that come in and you think, I know this person doesn't have the raw material, but I don't really have any grounds to not provide the education. So I think that dilemma could be solved. I think that if enough interpreter educators felt very strongly about entrance requirements and agreed on what those entrance requirements would be, then programs could then provide a more unified curriculum. Not that they would all have to be the same, but that the curriculum somehow would get the student to employment ready status at the end of the 4 years. And whether that's 4 years where they work during the summers, I don't know, but I feel like it could be done in 4 years if the bar at the beginning were higher. So that's the direction I'd like to see the field go in. We do have some program standards now, which is a great step. It took many, 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 many years to get to the point where we are. And I don't think they provide enough guidance for programs to know exactly what to do to improve their programs. But nevertheless, it's a good thing. It's better than where we were. But I think instead of evaluating programs, I think we need to look at the beginning step and make that a really big, serious step. There are still programs that are not allowed to have entrance requirements. And I think that's a disservice to take people into those programs if we can't really guarantee them or predict success for them in getting a job, because it's a practice profession. It's not like getting an English degree where you didn't expect to get a job necessarily from having an English degree.
Right.
So, did I answer the first question?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to see us get our act together in terms of entrance requirement, curricular standards. Really, the courses should really be organized in such a way that they get the person to employment ready. And I'd like to see, at the opposite end of that spectrum, I'd like to see exit requirements that are stringent. So a person may have been there for 4 years, but if they haven't completed the requirements of proficiency, then they shouldn't really be granted the diploma, the degree. I think they need to stay until they can achieve whatever the program outcomes are supposed to be, not just that you completed the coursework.
Right.
And then your second question?
My second question, well, before we move on to that, those are excellent suggestions. Are there any other that come to mind? Get our act together. And
I'd like to see more cooperation and support among interpreter educators. I feel like we're all in this together and we're all trying to do the same thing. So I'd like to see more person-to-person support. I'd like to see some of the people who have been in the field for a longer time mentor new interpreter educators. Just make that effort to contact someone or be contacted. I said that at CIT recently. I said, I think, all of you experienced educators, you should all be willing to take on a mentee or a newer interpreter educator. Someone came up to me right after the speech and said, would you take me on? I said, of course. But unfortunately, they haven't called me yet. But I would be glad to do that. I feel like that's something that many of us who have been in the field for a while could easily do. It wouldn't take much to speak to someone on the phone for 30 minutes, a couple times a month. How are you doing? And just give them support so that they could then become the authorities in the field. You have written about the graying of the profession. There are so many people who've been in positions who are now nearing or have already entered retirement. A number of people in the last 5 years have left the field due to retirement. And we've lost a lot there. We've lost a lot of their wisdom, and I don't know that they were mentoring people to replace them. So when all that expertise went out the door, we didn't have anything to fill it. So I think those of us who are still working and interpreting in the profession of teaching interpreting, I feel like we really have an obligation to help the newer people become authoritative and solid in their work. Because there are relatively so few interpreter educators, and there's so many people that still want to become interpreters. So I think one thing we used to have a long time ago in CIT was the share shops, and we had those, kind of regional meetings where people got together and they shared ideas, and those were wonderful. I was a new teacher when I went to those, and I just was so thrilled to have those opportunities to work with like 30 or 40 people at the most and share ideas and how does this work. So that gave me a feeling of support and I don't know that we have anything like that right now for new educators to feel supported, except what's happening at VRSII. VRSII has that educator empowerment series, which I'm sure you know about, and that provides small group opportunities for educators to come together and, you know, meet each other, talk with each other informally, and then formally follow some aspect of the discipline that's being instructed about at that time. And then the symposia that that VRSII has put on have also been, honestly, profession changing. There's nothing else like that out there, where there's things specifically designed for interpreter educators to help them, to support them, to bring them together, to meet face to face. I mean, just the face to face contact, that's priceless. And then they're also provided with, you know, new information and, you know, networking that supports them afterwards. So I think VRSII has done more for interpreter educators in the last 3 to 4 years than maybe anything that has ever existed before that time. And I like very much how those opportunities that I was talking about, the smaller group ones and the larger group ones, allow new educators to come, because, you know, that's where the more experienced people and the newer people can get to know each other, and maybe you could mentor someone, maybe you could bring them along. You know, I just feel like that environment that's being provided currently through VRSII is making such a huge difference. I don't know if it's noticeable yet to VRSII and the company Sorensen that's supporting it, because I think it takes a little while for the effect to show, but I think it's so revolutionary and so important that I think it's affecting the lives of many interpreter educators. And that's something that's really near and dear to my heart, is because I have always, you know, since I started writing the Effective Interpreting series, I've always wanted to help educators so that they could help students, so that there'd be more interpreters to work in the profession. So I really feel very strongly about providing opportunities for educators, and I'm very grateful for what VRSII has done.
Well, I think you were the visionary for the idea. So I think VRSII is could be a legacy of what you just said, because you were part of it, and you those are ideas that you wrote. So what VRSII is kind of a legacy of what you just said, of you.
Oh, well, I hadn't thought of it that way, but boy, that's great to say that. But, you know, writing the white paper and all the, you know, the work that led to the development of the VRSII was really just another example of doing what was asked of me next. I was given this wonderful opportunity to dream big. What's needed here? What's needed? You know, just dream big and hand it in a formal paper, you know. And that was a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to be part of that.
I think all those things that you just said could be categorized as a legacy that you left for the profession, passing things on, helping, teaching. Your series of books, of course, is certainly will be forever in our hands. So is that what you think or feel that maybe your legacy has been, or what do you feel is your legacy?
I don't know. Can you have a legacy while you're still alive?
Yes.
You can. Okay.
It's a hard one.
It is a hard one. I like that I have created a series of things that may or may not help people in the future, because I really wanted to leave that. Whether people use it or not, you know, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I think if I were to say what I would like it to be, I would like it to be that people who are currently have facility in something, whether it's teaching, interpreting, or something else, people that have that facility will help other people have that. So if in this case, if it's teaching, interpreting, I'd like those people who already are doing it to not feel threatened, but to feel like some sort of generosity toward helping newer people come along, so that when those people retire, there's still a good solid body of knowledge, a good standard of practice, so that the wheels don't fall off when some people retire. You know, I've seen that happen a lot when certain people who have a lot of power, a lot of knowledge, they change direction or leave the field, then there's a big void. And I just think that's avoidable. So I'd like people to be, if I would say I would like my legacy to include the fact that I'd like people to be enthusiastic about their work. If it's teaching, interpreting, I'd like them to be enthusiastic about it and curious enough to keep exploring what's new. What's new? What's new? Is there a new way to teach interpreting? Is there new research I'm not aware of? What's going on in spoken language interpreting? What can I find that's new and exciting to bring to my students? How can I make the job of interpreting real to them while they're still in school? And so they could decide, oh, I do want to do this, or I don't. Oh, I have to do that. I have to make decisions on my feet every day. Oh, that's not a fit for me. So I'd like them to have enough knowledge and passion about their own work to help students decide early on if they really want to be interpreters.
Mm-hmm.